Zekthara stood before the massive viewing screen in the High Command Center and felt his stomach turn with nervous energy. The blue-green planet rotating slowly on the display looked peaceful enough, but he knew that appearance meant nothing when it came to alien species. His superior, Commander Veltar, gestured toward the image with one of his forearms while speaking in the formal tone reserved for official briefings. "This is the third planet in what the inhabitants call the Sol System," Veltar explained as data scrolled across the screen. "The species calls itself humanity, and they have recently developed basic space travel. Our long-range scouts have detected military conflicts on their planet's surface, and the Confederacy needs to know what we might be dealing with if we decide to make contact." Zekthara nodded and tried to look more confident than he felt. This was his first solo observation mission, and he wanted to prove himself worthy of the intelligence division. He had spent years studying alien cultures and military tactics, but humans were still largely unknown to the galactic community. The few reports available described them as bipedal mammals with basic technology and a tendency toward tribal warfare. "Your mission is simple," Veltar continued, manipulating the display to show technical specifications. "Take the observation ship Silent Wing and position yourself in orbit around their planet. Use the cloaking systems to remain undetected while you document their military capabilities. We need to know about their weapons, tactics, and overall threat level before the Council decides whether to invite them into the Confederacy." The mission parameters appeared on Zekthara's personal datapad, and he reviewed them quickly. Standard observation protocols, minimal risk, expected duration of 10 solar cycles. It seemed straightforward enough, especially considering what he had learned about human technology. Their most advanced weapons appeared to be chemical-based projectile launchers, hardly a threat to ships equipped with energy shields and plasma cannons. Intelligence reports suggest they are still using kinetic weapons and chemical explosives, Veltar added, as if reading Zekthara's thoughts. Their space capabilities are limited to simple rocket propulsion, and they have no energy-based defensive systems that our sensors can detect. This should be a routine assessment. Zekthara felt his confidence growing as he absorbed the technical data. The humans seemed to be centuries behind most Confederacy species in terms of military technology. Their conflicts appeared to be small-scale affairs involving ground-based forces using primitive equipment. How dangerous could such a species possibly be to civilizations that had mastered faster-than-light travel and energy manipulation? "There is one thing worth noting," Veltar said, his tone shifting slightly. "Our psychological analysts have identified some unusual behavioral patterns in the limited data we have collected. Humans appear to place extraordinary value on individual lives, sometimes making tactically questionable decisions to avoid casualties. This could be either a significant weakness or an indication of social structures we do not yet understand." The younger officer made notes on his datapad, though he privately wondered how valuing individual lives could be anything other than a tactical disadvantage. In Confederacy military doctrine, mission success always took priority over individual survival. Emotional attachments were considered dangerous distractions that clouded judgment and led to poor strategic decisions. As Zekthara prepared to leave for his ship, Veltar handed him a sealed data cylinder containing detailed star charts and communication protocols. "Remember that you are there to observe only," the commander emphasized. "Under no circumstances should you interfere with human activities or reveal your presence. We need accurate intelligence, not diplomatic incidents." The observation ship Silent Wing was a marvel of Confederacy engineering designed specifically for covert intelligence gathering. Its cloaking systems could render it invisible to virtually any detection method known to galactic science, while its sensor arrays could monitor everything from individual conversations to large-scale military movements. Zekthara felt a sense of pride as he settled into the pilot's seat and began the launch sequence. The journey to the Sol system took 3 days at standard faster-than-light speeds, giving Zekthara time to review everything known about human military organization. Their forces seemed to be divided into national groups that sometimes fought each other and sometimes cooperated against common threats. They used ranks and hierarchies similar to those found in most military structures throughout the galaxy, though their decision-making processes appeared more chaotic and less efficient than standard Confederacy protocols. When the Silent Wing dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, Zekthara was struck by how ordinary everything looked. The yellow star was unremarkable, the planets followed predictable orbital patterns, and the small amount of space traffic he detected consisted of primitive, chemical-powered vessels that posed no threat to his advanced ship. He guided the Silent Wing into a stable orbit around Earth, well beyond the detection range of human sensors, and activated the cloaking systems. The ship vanished from all conventional scanning methods, becoming effectively invisible to anyone who might be watching. Zekthara settled back in his observation chair and began calibrating the sensor arrays to monitor human military activities. His first task was to locate active conflict zones where he could observe human combat behavior. The sensor sweeps revealed several areas of military activity, but one location caught his attention immediately. A human military unit was preparing for what appeared to be a rescue operation in a contested region. According to the intercepted communications, hostile forces had captured a group of civilians, and a relief mission was being organized. Perfect, Zekthara thought as he focused the sensors on the staging area. This would give him a chance to see how humans conducted complex military operations under pressure. He settled in to watch what he expected to be a textbook example of primitive tactical planning and crude execution. The human soldiers, he observed, seemed relaxed, almost casual, as they prepared their equipment and reviewed mission plans. They joked with each other, shared food, and displayed none of the serious discipline he expected from military personnel facing combat. Zekthara made initial notes about their apparent lack of proper military bearing, wondering if this casualness indicated poor training or low morale. As he watched the humans load their weapons and check their gear, Zekthara felt confident that his mission would be completed quickly and successfully. These creatures seemed hardly more advanced than the tribal warriors his own species had been thousands of years ago. How difficult could it be to assess the military capabilities of such a primitive civilization? The human military unit began moving at dawn, and Zekthara watched through his advanced sensors as they loaded into transport vehicles that looked crude compared to Confederacy hovercraft. Captain Jake Morrison stood near the lead vehicle, speaking quietly with his officers while soldiers climbed aboard with their weapons and equipment. The alien observer noted how the humans seemed to waste time on unnecessary conversation instead of focusing on mission efficiency. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez spread maps across the hood of one vehicle and pointed to various locations while explaining something to the other officers. Zekthara activated his translation systems and began listening to their communications, expecting to hear simple tactical discussions about moving from one point to another. Instead, he discovered that the humans were coordinating multiple simultaneous operations with a complexity that surprised him. Alpha Team takes the northern approach while Bravo circles around to block the southern exit, Rodriguez explained to the gathered soldiers. Charlie Team provides overwatch from the ridgeline, and Delta handles extraction once we secure the hostages. Remember that civilians are in the building, so watch your fire zones and communicate constantly. The level of coordination required for such an operation impressed Zekthara more than he expected. The humans were planning to execute 4 separate tactical movements simultaneously while maintaining communication between all units and protecting non-combatants. Even Confederacy forces would find such an operation challenging. Yet these supposedly primitive soldiers discussed it as if it were routine. Sergeant Ben Carter moved among the soldiers, checking their equipment and offering quiet words of encouragement. Zekthara noticed that the humans touched each other frequently, placing hands on shoulders or briefly clasping arms. This physical contact seemed to serve some kind of psychological purpose, though the alien observer could not understand what advantage it might provide in a military context. The convoy began moving across rough terrain toward the conflict zone, and Zekthara followed their progress through his sensors. The vehicles bounced and swayed over uneven ground, but the humans inside remained calm and continued their preparations. Private Danny Walsh, who appeared to be barely past adolescence by human standards, cleaned his weapon with practiced movements. While discussing something with the soldier next to him, when the convoy reached the staging area near the target building, Zekthara watched the humans deploy with movements that contradicted everything he had observed earlier. The casual, relaxed soldiers suddenly transformed into a precisely coordinated military unit. They moved with economy and purpose, taking positions that provided overlapping fields of fire while maintaining communication through hand signals and quiet radio transmissions. Captain Morrison positioned himself where he could observe all four teams while staying in communication with his headquarters. Lieutenant Rodriguez moved to an elevated position that gave her a clear view of the target building and surrounding area. The transformation from casual conversation to focused military precision happened so quickly that Zekthara had to review his sensor recordings to believe what he had witnessed. The hostile forces occupying the building appeared to be using similar weapons and tactics as the rescue team, but Zekthara immediately noticed differences in their behavior. The enemy soldiers moved with less coordination and seemed to focus primarily on defending fixed positions rather than adapting to changing circumstances. They had superior numbers and defensive advantages, but something about their movements suggested they were not prepared for the kind of assault the humans were planning. Sergeant Carter led Alpha Team toward the northern side of the building, using cover and concealment techniques that impressed Zekthara with their effectiveness. The humans seemed to understand their environment in ways that went beyond what their technology should have allowed. They used natural terrain features, shadows, and even wind patterns to mask their approach. Private Walsh raised his weapon and fired a single shot that eliminated an enemy sentry from a distance that should have been impossible with such primitive equipment. Zekthara immediately ran sensor scans to determine what kind of enhancement technology the human was using, but the readings showed nothing unusual. The young soldier had simply calculated range, wind speed, elevation, and target movement in his head while under stress and made a perfect shot. The assault began with simultaneous attacks from 3 directions while the 4th team moved to secure the extraction route. Zekthara watched in growing amazement as the humans demonstrated tactical flexibility that rivaled anything he had seen from advanced civilizations. When enemy forces concentrated their defense against Alpha Team, Bravo Team immediately adjusted their approach to exploit the weakness created on the opposite side. Lieutenant Rodriguez coordinated the entire operation while moving through dangerous terrain and making split-second tactical decisions. She tracked the positions of 4 separate teams, monitored enemy movements, coordinated with overhead reconnaissance, and maintained communication with command headquarters. The alien observer realized that she was performing the functions of a battlefield computer using only her organic brain. What disturbed Zekthara most was not the humans' tactical skill, but their emotional responses to combat. When Private Lisa Morgan was wounded by enemy fire, the entire dynamic of the battle changed. Instead of continuing the mission according to plan, the humans immediately shifted their priorities to protect their injured comrade. This should have been a fatal tactical error, but somehow they made it work. Corporal Alex Turner moved to Morgan's position under heavy fire, providing medical aid while simultaneously directing suppressing fire at enemy positions. Other soldiers adjusted their movements to create a protective perimeter around the wounded soldier, turning what should have been a weakness into a tactical advantage. The enemy forces, apparently not expecting such behavior, failed to exploit what should have been an obvious opportunity. Captain Morrison made a decision that defied all military logic by leading a direct assault against the strongest enemy position, to draw fire away from his wounded soldier. Zekthara calculated the probability of success for such an attack and arrived at numbers so low that no rational commander would attempt it. Yet somehow the human captain not only survived the assault, but successfully neutralized the enemy position. The rescue operation continued with the humans, demonstrating an ability to adapt their tactics in real time based on changing conditions. When their original plan became impossible due to enemy resistance, they improvised new approaches without losing coordination or effectiveness. Zekthara watched soldiers make independent decisions that somehow supported the overall mission without requiring direct orders from their officers. Private Walsh continued to demonstrate marksmanship that challenged everything Zekthara knew about organic limitations. The young human eliminated targets at ranges and under conditions that should have been impossible. Yet sensor scans continued to show nothing but natural human physiology. There was no technological enhancement, no computer assistance, just organic neural activity operating at efficiency levels that seemed to violate biological principles. The humans fought their way into the building where the hostages were held. Zekthara realized that he was not observing primitive warfare conducted with crude weapons. He was watching something far more dangerous. A species that had evolved to exceed their own physical limitations through coordination, adaptability, and an emotional commitment to each other that transformed individual weaknesses into collective strengths. The enemy forces began withdrawing from their positions, apparently overwhelmed by the humans' unconventional tactics and relentless pressure. Zekthara noted that the hostile soldiers seemed confused by their opponents' willingness to take risks for wounded comrades and their ability to coordinate complex movements without obvious technological support. When the humans finally breached the building and began evacuating the hostages, Zekthara found himself completely revising his initial assessment. These were not primitive warriors using crude weapons. They were evolutionary survivors who had turned emotional bonds into tactical advantages and transformed individual limitations into collective superiority. The alien observer began to understand that human military effectiveness did not depend on superior technology or logical tactical doctrine. It was based on something far more dangerous: the ability to function as a collective organism that became stronger under pressure and more dangerous when protecting others. The situation changed dramatically when enemy reinforcements arrived with heavy weapons platforms that should have ended the human rescue operation immediately. Zekthara watched through his sensors as armored vehicles approached the building, their weapon systems far superior to anything the human soldiers carried. By all logical calculations, Captain Morrison's forces should have withdrawn immediately to avoid complete destruction. Instead, the humans did something that made no tactical sense. They spread out to engage the armored vehicles with their primitive weapons while continuing to evacuate the hostages. Zekthara prepared to document their inevitable defeat, but what happened next challenged everything he thought he knew about military science. Sergeant Carter appeared on a rooftop carrying what the human military called a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. The weapon looked crude compared to Confederacy energy weapons, but Carter aimed it with the same impossible precision that Private Walsh had demonstrated earlier. The sergeant calculated the trajectory of his projectile while accounting for wind speed, target movement, and building interference, all while enemy forces fired at his position. The chemical explosive struck the armored vehicle at exactly the right angle to penetrate its defensive systems and detonate the ammunition storage. Zekthara ran immediate sensor scans to understand how such a primitive weapon could defeat armor that should have been impervious to chemical explosives. The answer disturbed him more than the destruction itself. Carter had identified a microscopic weakness in the vehicle's design and exploited it with mathematical precision that rivaled Confederacy targeting computers. Private Morgan, despite her injuries from the earlier fighting, continued to engage enemy forces with determination that bordered on the impossible. She had lost significant amounts of blood and should have been incapacitated by pain and shock, yet she maintained accurate fire while moving through dangerous terrain. Zekthara's medical sensors indicated that her body was operating beyond normal biological limits through sheer force of will. Lieutenant Rodriguez coordinated artillery support from distant human forces while simultaneously directing the evacuation of hostages and managing the tactical positions of 4 separate teams. She performed these tasks while running between positions under enemy fire, making calculations that required the processing power of advanced computers. The alien observer could not understand how organic neural tissue could function at such efficiency levels under extreme stress. When enemy aircraft arrived to support the ground forces, Zekthara assumed the human operation would finally collapse. The attacking aircraft carried weapons that could eliminate entire buildings, and the humans had no apparent air defense systems. He prepared to document the end of what had been a surprisingly effective rescue attempt. Private Walsh appeared, in an exposed position carrying a shoulder-mounted missile launcher that looked even more primitive than Carter's weapon. The young soldier tracked the incoming aircraft while calculating intercept angles, timing, and the complex physics of engaging a fast-moving aerial target. Enemy forces concentrated their fire on his position, but Walsh remained steady and focused. The missile Walsh fired should not have been able to intercept a military aircraft equipped with defensive systems and evasive capabilities. The projectile moved too slowly and lacked the guidance systems necessary for such a difficult target. Yet somehow Walsh had predicted exactly where the aircraft would be when his missile reached that point in space, and the chemical warhead detonated with devastating effect. Zekthara immediately ran comprehensive scans of the human soldiers, convinced they must be using some form of technological enhancement that his sensors could not detect. The results showed nothing but organic tissue operating at efficiency levels that should have been biologically impossible. The humans were not using hidden technology. They were simply exceeding their own physical limitations through methods that galactic science could not explain. Corporal Turner engaged enemy ground forces with weapons that fired small metal projectiles propelled by chemical explosions. The technology was so primitive that Confederacy museums would classify it as ancient history, yet Turner achieved results that energy weapons would struggle to match. He eliminated targets while moving at full speed, firing around obstacles, and coordinating with other soldiers through methods that required no technological communication systems. The enemy forces began showing signs of confusion and demoralization, as their superior numbers and advanced weapons failed to achieve decisive results against the human soldiers. Zekthara observed enemy commanders making increasingly desperate tactical decisions as they struggled to understand how their opponents continued to function. Despite taking casualties and facing overwhelming odds, Captain Morrison led his forces in what military doctrine would classify as a series of tactically impossible maneuvers. He divided his already outnumbered unit into even smaller groups that should have been easily defeated, yet each group accomplished objectives that larger forces with better equipment had failed to achieve. The human captain seemed to understand something about warfare that contradicted everything taught in Confederacy. Military academies, the evacuation of hostages continued even as the battle intensified around the building. Human soldiers protected civilians while engaging enemy forces, maintaining communication between scattered units and adapting their tactics to counter every enemy response. They accomplished multiple complex objectives simultaneously without losing effectiveness in any area. Zekthara realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic military history. The humans were not just winning against superior odds. They were making it look routine. Every impossible shot, every tactical adaptation, every example of coordination under fire was performed as if such things were normal military procedure. Private Walsh eliminated another enemy position with a single shot that required him to calculate bullet trajectory through multiple obstacles while accounting for atmospheric conditions and target movement. When Zekthara analyzed the physics involved, he discovered that the young soldier had performed mathematical operations that would challenge most Confederacy battle computers. Sergeant Carter destroyed a second armored vehicle using improvised explosives that he constructed from materials found in the building. The chemical compounds should not have been powerful enough to penetrate military armor, but Carter had combined them in ways that created a shaped charge effect more precise than manufactured weapons. He had invented advanced military technology. In his head, while under combat stress, Lieutenant Rodriguez continued to coordinate the entire operation, while providing medical aid to wounded soldiers, directing artillery strikes, and maintaining communication with command headquarters. Zekthara counted at least 12 separate functions that she was performing simultaneously, each of which would normally require dedicated personnel and specialized equipment. The enemy forces began withdrawing from their positions as their casualties mounted and their tactical options diminished. They had started the engagement with overwhelming advantages in numbers, equipment, and defensive positions, yet they were being systematically defeated by a smaller human force, using supposedly primitive weapons. As the last enemy soldiers retreated from the area, Zekthara found himself staring at sensor readings that contradicted everything he thought he knew about military science. The humans had achieved a complete tactical victory against superior forces through methods that seemed to violate the basic principles of warfare. The hostages were successfully evacuated. Enemy forces were neutralized or driven off, and the human soldiers had accomplished their mission objectives with minimal casualties. By any standard of military analysis, what Zekthara had witnessed should have been impossible, yet the humans treated their victory as if it were nothing special. They checked on their wounded comrades, secured their equipment, and prepared for extraction with the same casual efficiency they had shown before the battle began. There was no celebration, no dramatic speeches, just professional soldiers completing another day's work. Zekthara began to understand that human military capability was not about individual heroics or superior technology. It was about a species that had evolved to function as a collective organism that became more effective under pressure and more dangerous when protecting others. The implications of this discovery were far more frightening than any weapon system the Confederacy had ever encountered. The situation deteriorated rapidly when enemy reinforcements surrounded the extraction zone and captured several human positions. Zekthara watched through his sensors as hostile forces established a defensive perimeter that made escape impossible for Captain Morrison's unit. Any rational military commander would order immediate withdrawal to prevent total loss of personnel and equipment. Enemy communications, intercepted by Zekthara's translation systems, revealed their ultimatum. The human soldiers had 1 hour to surrender unconditionally, or the hostages they had rescued would be executed in retaliation. The alien observer calculated the tactical options available to the humans and found them all unacceptable. Retreat meant abandoning the civilians they had risked everything to save, while continuing to fight guaranteed their destruction against overwhelming odds. Captain Morrison gathered his officers for what Zekthara assumed would be a tactical withdrawal planning session. Instead, the human commander proposed something that violated every principle of military logic the alien had ever learned. Morrison wanted to split his already outnumbered forces into 2 groups. One would create a diversion to draw enemy attention while the other attempted to reach and protect the hostages. Lieutenant Rodriguez immediately pointed out the mathematical impossibility of success. Sir, we have 37 effective soldiers against at least 200 enemy forces in prepared positions, she said while studying the tactical display. Dividing our strength reduces our combat effectiveness by more than half while the enemy maintains all their advantages. Sergeant Carter nodded in agreement with the lieutenant's assessment. The diversion team would be walking into certain death, and the protection team would face impossible odds even if the diversion succeeded, he explained to the assembled soldiers. There's no tactical scenario where both objectives can be accomplished with acceptable casualties. Zekthara expected Captain Morrison to acknowledge these facts and order a strategic withdrawal that would preserve his unit for future operations. Instead, the human commander asked for volunteers to lead the diversion mission, knowing that he was essentially asking for soldiers to sacrifice their lives for people they had never met before today. The response horrified the alien observer. Instead of the rational silence he expected, every single soldier in the unit volunteered for the suicide mission. Private Walsh, barely past adolescence by any species standards, stepped forward first. I'll take point on the diversion, sir, he said with the same casual tone he had used when discussing equipment earlier. Corporal Turner moved to stand beside Walsh. I'm going with him, Turner announced while checking his weapon systems. 2 soldiers can create more tactical confusion than 1, and we can cover each other's movements until the end. Private Morgan, still recovering from her injuries, insisted on joining the diversion team despite medical recommendations that she remain in a protected position. "These people risked their lives to get us this far," she said while adjusting her equipment. "I'm not going to let them down now." Zekthara ran psychological analysis scans on the human soldiers, convinced that they must be suffering from some form of mental breakdown that prevented rational decision-making. The scans showed elevated stress levels but no signs of psychological damage or impaired judgment. The humans were making their decisions with full knowledge of the consequences and complete understanding of their tactical situation. Captain Morrison selected Corporal Turner to lead the diversion team, a choice that demonstrated the captain's understanding of his soldiers' capabilities. Turner had proven himself capable of impossible tactical achievements throughout the operation, and if anyone could survive a suicide mission, it would be him. The diversion team prepared their equipment with the same professional efficiency they had shown throughout the operation. They distributed their remaining ammunition, checked their communication systems, and coordinated timing with the protection team. There was no dramatic farewell, no emotional speeches, just soldiers preparing to do their job under impossible circumstances. Zekthara watched in growing horror as the humans finalized their plans. The diversion team would assault the strongest enemy positions to draw maximum attention and firepower away from the hostages. The protection team would use the resulting confusion to reach the civilians and establish a defensive perimeter. Both objectives required tactical miracles that defied probability calculations. "Remember that the goal is not to win," Turner explained to his team as they moved toward their assault positions. "The goal is to make enough noise and cause enough problems that every enemy soldier focuses on us instead of the hostages. We need to be the biggest threat they've ever seen until the protection team completes their mission." The alien observer realized that human military doctrine included tactical concepts that no other species had ever developed. The diversion team was not trying to achieve victory through superior firepower or tactical positioning. They were trying to become so dangerous that enemy forces would have no choice but to concentrate everything against them. Private Walsh checked his weapon one final time before moving out with the diversion team. "Sir, if we don't make it out of this, tell my family that I was thinking about them," he said to Captain Morrison. The young soldier's voice remained steady despite the mathematical certainty of his approaching death. The diversion assault began with Turner's team attacking enemy positions that should have been impregnable. They used every technique they had demonstrated earlier in the operation, but now they applied those skills with the desperate intensity of soldiers who knew they would not survive to see the results. The alien observer watched them transform from effective soldiers into something far more terrifying. Corporal Turner led charges against fortified positions that should have stopped entire battalions. Private Walsh eliminated enemy soldiers with impossible shots while moving through concentrated fire that should have killed him instantly. Private Morgan provided covering fire with accuracy that rivaled automated defensive systems. Despite injuries that should have incapacitated her hours earlier, the enemy forces responded exactly as the humans had predicted, concentrating their attention and firepower against the diversion team while losing track of the protection team's movements. Zekthara realized that the humans had turned their own deaths into a tactical weapon more effective than any technology the Confederacy possessed. Captain Morrison led the protection team toward the hostages while the enemy focused on destroying Turner's assault group. The human commander moved through hostile territory using routes that should have been impossible to traverse, but the diversion team had created enough chaos to make the impossible merely dangerous. Sergeant Carter coordinated the protection team's approach while monitoring the diversion team's status through radio communications. The reports coming back were increasingly desperate as Turner soldiers faced overwhelming firepower with no hope of reinforcement or extraction. Yet they continued fighting with effectiveness that increased rather than decreased as their situation became more hopeless. Lieutenant Rodriguez reached the hostage location and began establishing defensive positions while the diversion team drew ever more enemy attention. The mathematical precision she had demonstrated throughout the operation now took on desperate urgency as she calculated fields of fire, ammunition consumption, and tactical positioning under time pressure that would have paralyzed most commanders. Zekthara listened to the radio communications between the two human teams and heard something that challenged his understanding of intelligent behavior. The diversion team reported their status with the same professional calm they had maintained throughout the operation, even as their tactical situation became increasingly impossible. "Protection team, this is Turner," came the transmission as explosive sounds echoed in the background. "We have successfully drawn primary enemy attention to our position. Estimate 15 minutes before our position becomes untenable. Recommend you complete your objective within that time frame." The alien observer realized that the humans were not just willing to die for abstract concepts like duty or honor. They were calculating their own deaths as tactical resources to be expended for maximum strategic advantage. This represented a form of warfare that no galactic civilization had ever conceived, much less implemented successfully. Against every probability calculation Zekthara had run, both human objectives succeeded. The protection team secured the hostages while the diversion team not only survived their suicide mission but managed to break through enemy lines and reach the extraction point. The alien observer found himself staring at sensor readings that defied everything he thought he knew about military mathematics and tactical physics. Corporal Turner's team emerged from what should have been certain death, battered and bleeding, but alive. Private Walsh had sustained wounds that would have killed most species, yet he continued to provide covering fire for his teammates while they moved toward the rendezvous point. Private Morgan had lost consciousness twice during the fighting but somehow maintained tactical awareness and continued engaging enemy targets. The cost of their impossible victory became apparent as human medical teams began treating the wounded. Zekthara watched through his sensors as soldiers who had performed superhuman feats of combat effectiveness collapsed from injuries they had ignored during the fighting. The same biological systems that had allowed them to exceed their physical limitations now demanded payment for that temporary transcendence. Captain Morrison moved among his wounded soldiers, refusing medical attention for himself until every member of his unit had been evaluated and treated. The alien observer noted that the human commander had sustained injuries that should have impaired his judgment and motor functions, yet he had continued leading the operation with undiminished effectiveness until the moment the shooting stopped. Lieutenant Rodriguez coordinated the medical evacuation while simultaneously debriefing team leaders and maintaining communication with command headquarters. She performed these tasks despite blood loss and stress reactions that would have incapacitated soldiers from most species Zekthara knew. Her hands shook uncontrollably when she thought no one was watching, yet her voice remained steady and professional during all official communications. The most disturbing aspect of the human post-battle behavior was their willingness to share limited medical resources without regard for rank or personal relationships. Private Walsh, despite his severe injuries, insisted that his blood plasma be given to Corporal Turner because Turner's blood type was more rare. Sergeant Carter refused pain medication so that it would be available for soldiers with more serious wounds. Zekthara observed medical procedures that revealed the true cost of human combat effectiveness. The soldiers had pushed their bodies beyond biological limits through mechanisms that galactic science could not explain. But those mechanisms extracted prices that became apparent only after the fighting ended. Several soldiers required immediate surgery for injuries they had sustained hours earlier, but somehow ignored during combat. The emotional aftermath proved even more disturbing than the physical casualties. Private Walsh, who had performed impossible feats of marksmanship throughout the operation, broke down completely when he realized how many enemy soldiers he had killed. The young human who had eliminated targets with computer-like precision now sobbed uncontrollably over the deaths he had caused. Corporal Turner sat alone after medical treatment, staring at nothing while his hands continued to shake from stress. Reactions. The soldier who had led a successful assault against Impossible odds now appeared broken by the psychological cost of his achievements. When other soldiers tried to comfort him, he could only repeat that he kept seeing the faces of the enemies he had been forced to kill. Lieutenant Rodriguez maintained her professional demeanor during official procedures, but Zekthara's sensors detected stress indicators that suggested she was near complete psychological collapse. She had coordinated the deaths of dozens of enemy soldiers with mathematical precision, yet the emotional weight of those decisions now threatened to destroy her mental stability. The alien observer began to understand that human military effectiveness came with psychological costs that would destroy most other species. The same emotional bonds that made them willing to die for each other also made them suffer intensely when forced to kill their enemies. They were simultaneously the most effective and most emotionally fragile warriors the galaxy had ever produced. Captain Morrison gathered his officers for an after-action review that revealed the true nature of human military psychology. "We accomplished our mission and saved the hostages," he said while reviewing casualty reports. "But we also took lives today, and that's something we'll have to carry with us. The fact that it was necessary doesn't make it easier." The human soldiers conducted their debriefing with the same professional efficiency they had shown throughout the operation, but Zekthara could detect the emotional undercurrents that threatened to overwhelm them. They analyzed their tactics, evaluated their equipment performance, and identified areas for improvement, all while struggling with psychological trauma that would have incapacitated warriors from more logical species. Sergeant Carter distributed personal effects recovered from enemy casualties to be returned to their families, a practice that shocked Zekthara with its implications. The humans not only felt guilt over killing their enemies, but took responsibility for ensuring that enemy families received closure about their lost loved ones. This behavior contradicted every military doctrine the alien had ever studied. The wounded soldiers supported each other through medical procedures with the same dedication they had shown during combat. Private Morgan held Walsh's hand during surgery while Turner kept Carter awake during treatment for shock. The emotional bonds that had made them effective fighters now provided psychological support that prevented complete mental breakdown. Zekthara realized that human post-battle behavior revealed something more frightening than their combat capabilities. They were able to bear psychological costs that would destroy other species, because they shared those costs among the entire group. Individual trauma became collective responsibility, preventing any single soldier from carrying unbearable emotional weight alone. The extraction operation proceeded with continued efficiency, despite the emotional and physical trauma the soldiers had endured. Human medical personnel treated both their own wounded and enemy casualties with equal dedication, another behavior pattern that defied military logic but somehow worked within the context of human psychology. As the human forces prepared to leave the area, Zekthara observed them performing final tasks that revealed the full complexity of their military culture. They collected intelligence materials, secured equipment that could not be evacuated, and even left medical supplies for enemy wounded who could not be immediately treated. The hostages they had rescued gathered to thank their rescuers, and Zekthara watched the humans' reactions to gratitude from the people they had risked everything to save. Instead of pride or satisfaction, the soldiers showed embarrassment and discomfort when praised for their actions. They seemed to view extraordinary heroism as ordinary duty that required no special recognition. Captain Morrison's final radio transmission to headquarters summarized the operation in terms that minimized the miraculous nature of what his unit had accomplished. Mission successful, hostages secured, enemy forces neutralized. He reported as if describing routine training exercises rather than tactical impossibilities achieved through superhuman effort. The alien observer found himself struggling to comprehend. Warriors who could perform mathematical miracles under fire, yet suffered emotional breakdowns over the enemies they killed. The humans had demonstrated combat effectiveness that surpassed anything in galactic military history, but they had done so at psychological costs that revealed both their greatest strength and their most dangerous vulnerability. Zekthara began to understand that human military superiority was not based on superior technology or tactical doctrine, but on their ability to bear costs that would destroy other species. They could exceed their physical limitations because they were willing to accept the consequences, and they could make tactical sacrifices because they shared the emotional weight among their entire group. As the human forces completed their withdrawal, the alien observer realized that he had witnessed something unprecedented in military science, a species that had turned their own vulnerability into their greatest tactical advantage. Zakhthara returned to his observation ship with sensor recordings that contained enough data to keep Confederacy analysts busy for years, but he found himself unable to begin the report that High Command expected. How could he explain that everything the Confederacy believed about military science was wrong? How could he describe warriors who violated the laws of physics through emotional determination and tactical doctrine that treated individual lives as both expendable and infinitely valuable? The standard military assessment forms on his data screen seemed inadequate for documenting what he had witnessed. The Confederacy wanted to know about human weapons technology, tactical capabilities, and threat levels, but those categories could not capture the reality of human warfare. Their weapons were primitive by galactic standards, yet they achieved results that advanced energy systems could not match. Their tactics violated established military principles, yet they succeeded against impossible odds. Zakhthara spent hours reviewing his recordings, trying to identify the source of human military superiority that he could explain in terms his superiors would understand. The sensor data showed ordinary biological creatures using basic chemical weapons and simple communication systems. There was no hidden technology, no genetic enhancement, no external assistance that could account for their impossible achievements. The truth was far more disturbing than any technological advantage would have been. The humans had evolved into something that galactic civilization had never encountered. A species that became more dangerous when protecting others and more effective when facing impossible odds. Their greatest weapon was not any piece of equipment but their willingness to exceed their own biological limitations for abstract concepts like duty and loyalty. Captain Morrison's forces had demonstrated tactical capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about warfare, but their methods could not be replicated by other species. Confederacy soldiers trained for efficiency and logical decision-making would be destroyed by the emotional costs that humans accepted as normal. Military service. The psychological trauma that strengthened human unit cohesion would shatter the mental stability of more rational warriors. Zakhthara attempted to write a conventional threat assessment but found that every category required explanations that sounded like science fiction rather than military intelligence. Human soldiers who performed impossible mathematical calculations in their heads while under fire could not be classified using standard intelligence metrics. Warriors who treated their own deaths as tactical resources defied all existing psychological profiles. The alien observer realized that his initial mission parameters had been based on completely false assumptions about the nature of military capability. The Confederacy measured military strength through technology, numbers, and logical tactical doctrine, but humans had proven that emotional bonds and psychological determination could overcome any material disadvantage. A priority transmission from High Command interrupted his struggle with the report, and Commander Veltar's image appeared on the communication screen. Zakhthara, we have received preliminary sensor data from your mission, the commander said while reviewing information on his own display. Our analysts are questioning some of your readings. Please confirm that human soldiers were achieving targeting accuracy that exceeds computer-assisted systems while using unguided projectile weapons. The readings are accurate, sir, Zakhthara replied while trying to keep his voice steady. I ran multiple sensor calibrations and verified all data through independent systems. The humans consistently performed feats that should be biologically impossible using weapons that should be tactically inadequate. Commander Veltar's expression showed the same confusion that Zakhthara had been struggling with since returning from his observation mission. Our military scientists want to know what enhancement technology the humans are using, the commander continued. They refuse to believe that organic neural tissue can process tactical information at the speeds your recordings indicate. There's no enhancement technology, sir, Zekthara explained while displaying his most detailed sensor scans. I monitored every human soldier throughout the operation using medical sensors that can detect artificial implants, chemical stimulants, and energy field manipulation. The humans are operating purely on biological systems that somehow exceed their apparent limitations. The silence that followed this explanation lasted long enough for Zekthara to wonder if the communication link had failed. Finally, Commander, Veltar spoke in a tone that suggested he was struggling to accept what he was hearing. You are telling me that humans can outperform our battle computers using nothing but their natural brains while under extreme combat stress? Yes, sir, Zekthara confirmed while highlighting specific examples from his recordings. Private Walsh calculated targeting solutions that required simultaneous processing of range, windage, elevation, target movement, and obstacle interference while enemy forces concentrated fire on his position. Lieutenant Rodriguez coordinated 4 separate tactical operations simultaneously, while moving through hostile terrain and making real-time strategic adjustments based on changing battlefield conditions. The implications of these capabilities were becoming clear to both officers as they reviewed the sensor data. If humans could achieve such results with primitive technology, what would they be capable of with access to Confederacy weapons and equipment? The prospect of human soldiers armed with energy weapons and supported by galactic military technology was terrifying to contemplate. There is something else you need to know, sir, Zekthara added while accessing his communication logs. The humans detected my presence despite our cloaking systems. Captain Morrison sent a direct transmission to my ship near the end of the operation. Commander Veltar's image leaned forward with obvious concern. What did the transmission contain? He asked while security protocols automatically activated around their communication link. Zekthara played the recording of Captain Morrison's message, and both officers listened to the human commander's calm voice delivering words that would haunt Confederacy leadership for years to come. If you're evaluating us for first contact, you should know that what you saw today wasn't us at our most dangerous. That was us showing restraint. The message continued with observations that proved the humans had been aware of alien observation throughout their operation. We detected your scanning systems during the first hour of our mission, Morrison explained with the same professional tone he had used for tactical communications. Our electromagnetic warfare specialists identified energy signatures that don't match any known technology, which told us we were being watched by someone with capabilities beyond our current understanding. Commander Veltar paused the recording and stared at Zekthara with an expression that mixed disbelief with growing alarm. They detected our most advanced stealth technology using primitive electromagnetic sensors? He asked while reviewing technical specifications that should have made such detection impossible. According to their message, they modified their standard equipment to identify energy patterns outside normal parameters, Zekthara explained while displaying the relevant technical data. They recognized that unusual scanning activity indicated observation by an unknown intelligence and adjusted their behavior accordingly. The final portion of Morrison's message contained the statement that would reshape Confederacy policy toward humanity. We chose to demonstrate our capabilities because we assumed you were evaluating our potential as allies or enemies, the human commander explained. We wanted you to know that we can be very effective friends, but we thought you should also understand why becoming our enemies would be inadvisable. Commander Veltar terminated the communication link and left Zekthara alone with the impossible task of writing a report that would convince Confederacy leadership to treat humanity with extreme caution. The young intelligence officer stared at his blank report screen while trying to find words that could convey the true nature of what he had discovered. The humans were not just another species seeking membership in the galactic community. They were evolutionary survivors who had turned emotional vulnerability into tactical strength and individual limitations into collective superiority. They possessed military capabilities that could not be measured using conventional standards and psychological resilience that would allow them to bear costs that would destroy other civilizations. Zekthara finally began typing his report with a recommendation that would haunt him for the rest of his career. "Do not engage humanity in warfare under any circumstances," he wrote while reviewing his recordings one final time. "But more importantly, do not let them think we consider them enemies. They are not a species to be conquered or contained. They are a species to be very, very carefully befriended." The alien observer concluded his report with an observation that captured the true horror of what he had witnessed. Humanity's greatest weapon is not their technology or their tactics. It is their ability to inspire both absolute loyalty and absolute terror, sometimes in the same moment, sometimes in the same person.